or W7. Um, so we're very happy to have partnered with the W7 on this session. The moderator for the next session has worked for over 30 years on gender equality and women's rights. Beth has a particular interest in gender equality financing, women, peace, and security, and the feminist foreign policy. She is a co-chair of this year's Women's 7 and a member of Canada's Gender Equality Advisory Council. Beth is currently a senior fellow with the Feminist Foreign Policy Collaborative. So please give a warm welcome to Beth Woroniuk and the panel. Is she here today? She's not here? Oh. Okay, well, sorry about that. I was ill-informed. Thanks, Maywan. Let's stay a few more minutes, and we'll start the panel in a few minutes when they come back. All right, so now we can actually get started. So sorry about that earlier. I'm happy to introduce our moderator for the next panel. So I will reintroduce Beth. That's okay, that's okay. So Beth Woroniuk, for the moderator for the next session, has worked for over 30 years in gender equality and women's rights. Beth has particular interest in gender equality financing, women, peace and security, and feminist foreign policy. She is co-chair of this year's Women's 7 and a member of Canada's Gender Equality Advisory Council. Beth is currently a senior fellow with the Feminist Foreign Policy Collaborative, so please give a warm welcome to Beth and the whole panel.
Thank you, Darren. And thank you so much to Cooperation Canada for pulling this event together, bringing us together, and a special thank you to all of the people who traveled far distances to be with us. Welcome to the final session on the civil society portion of the summit, Gender Justice in 2025, Progress Challenges and the Road Ahead. I'm really pleased that we have three wonderful speakers. I'd like to set the context just really briefly before we get into the discussion. This year is 30 years since the Beijing Conference on Women and the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, and it's also 25 years since the first UN Security Council resolution on women, peace, and security. So there is a lot of stock taking. There's a lot of questioning of how far we've come. And I think while there is the consensus that there has been significant progress, that the progress is too slow, that we're stalled, and that in many cases we are going backwards. The Secretary General of the UN, when he opened the Commission on the Status of Women last month, said, "Women's rights are under siege. The poison of patriarchy is back, and it is back with a vengeance, slamming the brakes on action, tearing up progress, and mutating into new and dangerous forms." We're seeing anti-rights actors on the rise. We're seeing an increase in hate crimes against LGBTQ people, funding cuts to feminist organizations, new and restrictive laws, restrictions on organizations using online technologies to dox, harass, intimidate. We're seeing LGBTQ rights being targeted, reproductive rights being targeted in various ways around the world, and feminism is often being mobilized in the culture wars. Yet, at the same time, we are seeing the fight back on the rollback. We are seeing, as was mentioned yesterday and earlier today, we're seeing organizations build momentum, build networks, and develop responses. We're seeing an organization of Indigenous women with disabilities in Nepal bringing their voices to local, national, and international levels. We're seeing territorial land defenders in Latin America fight for human rights and environmental sustainability. We're seeing changes on land tenure in various places, strengthening the rights of women and girls. And we're seeing advocates in the halls of the UN for a more just economic order that lives into feminist principles. And we're pleased to have Patricia on our panel to explain a little bit more about that. And this is the context for the G7 in 2025. There has been a lot of discussion yesterday on this challenging context with the Canadian election and all the different opportunities. And we know that there's going to be particular challenges related to gender equality and gender justice. When one of the principals around the G7 table has declared war on DEI and has signed an executive order stating that there are only two genders that cannot be changed, and has launched initiatives to dehumanize trans people. And not only is that happening in the United States, but this is being taken globally, as we've seen through threats to multilateral institutions. In this context, we're hearing that the G7 is a consensus organization, that discussions are going to focus on where there can be agreement. We're seeing the fallout of that focus, and just concretely, we have one example, and that's the first foreign ministers meeting. Last year in Italy, there was, the foreign ministers issued a communiqué that was 23 pages long, and it included a whole section on gender equality that reaffirmed the G7's global leadership on gender equality and the promotion and protection of the rights of women and girls in all their diversity, as well as LGBTQIA+ persons. This year, the statement was much shorter. It was only 23 paragraphs, not 23 pages. And there was no comparable statement, no recognition of rights, nothing along those lines. There were two isolated references to women and girls. So this narrowing of focus, narrowing of ambition, and we're seeing a failure to hold the line on previous G7 language on issues related to gender justice. So to help us explore this issue, I'm really glad to have our three panelists. Unfortunately, our fourth panelist, Cara, is not well today. So we send Cara and her family best wishes for a recovery, and we're sorry to not have her join the panel. But we do have Patricia Miranda, who is now well known to you, have her voice up here on the previous panel. And Patricia is the Global Advocacy Director and Coordinator of the New Financial Architecture Team at the Latin American Network for Economic and Social Justice, LatinDad. We have Debbie Owusu-Akia, who is the Co-Director of Policy and Advocacy at Action Canada for Sexual Health and Rights. And we have Claire House, who is the Director of Programming, Partnerships and Learning at Dignity Network Canada. So there's more information on their bios in the app, so I encourage you to have a look. They're all three very interesting, dynamic people, and we're very glad to have them with us today. So how is this going to work? We have a few questions for the panel that we're going to do. We're going to open the floor for questions, comments from the audience, and then come back to wrap up. We're very aware that we're the ones standing between you and lunch, so we will try to move through with some alacrity. Patricia, I did ask for an interesting or an unusual fact about you, and I'd like to share that Patricia, in addition to her in-depth knowledge of debt and finances, likes to dance Zumba. So maybe we could get Patricia to organize something for us later today. Let's start with this challenging moment. You've talked about the debt situation. You've talked about some of the challenges that you're seeing from Latin America, and I'm wondering, as a feminist working on financial issues, what would you like to see the G7 address? How do you bring these various threads together?
Well, thank you, Beth, and hi again. It's me again. So I feel that I should at least say a joke, but I'm not good at jokes. So thanks for bearing up with me in a second panel. And also I appreciate the opportunity to talk about gender and fiscal policies here today. So for me, the G7 could have an interesting role in promoting a fiscal policy that generates substantive changes on women's lives, and that is more rights, less inequalities, through an international financial reform on taxes and debt management as among the key issues in terms of financing public budgets. But with the inclusion, a strong inclusion of a feminist approach on these fiscal policies, and by this I mean expenditures, I mean incomes and debt. So in terms of expenditures, it will be important that G7 countries contribute to promote universal policies, for instance, for public services provision that guarantees women's rights and reducing inequalities. Considering the main policy demands that women have in my region, in Latin America, among the main demands are protection against violence, financing or policies that could guarantee social and reproductive rights. This is what are the main calls in the March of 8 of March. But also in the last couple of years, feminists in Latin America are also calling for financing for care systems. So these are the criteria that should lead the expenditure decisions in a public budget. The second item is about incomes. And in terms of incomes, besides the well-known tax justice demands as progressive tax systems, tackling illicit financial flows, I won't go deep into that. I would like to add one more that is not usually addressed, and this is contributions to social security. And this is not a big item in a public budget, but a change in this approach would be really important for women, because this is these contributions come mainly from remunerated work, and women are mainly non-remunerated, or if they do, with low salaries. And according to that contribution are the type of benefits that women could have in our countries, in the Global South, but also in the Global North. And this is a reality for all countries in my region, for all countries in the Global South. And a change in this would deeply reduce inequalities among countries, but also within countries. Latin America is still one of the most unequal regions in the world, and this is because of the inequalities against women. So to change the social security system approach would allow to other women that are not necessarily remunerated to have access to other benefits, for instance, maternity leaves or retirement, which are benefits that in many cases are like a luxury benefit because they don't have access to this. And what would be some of these changes like? For instance, that not only the workers that have an actual contribution to social security could have the benefits from that. So to promote this kind of changes in policies from the G7, that these are kind of rights that women in the Global North usually do have. So to promote this kind of changes in other countries and to help with these changes, that will be very important in terms of women's rights. And in my third point, in terms of debt and financing, it will be important to promote gender bias in terms of what are the decisions, what are these loans or credits financing. And they usually finance infrastructure, roads, and so on. But they don't finance care infrastructure, for instance, and that would be really a game changer for women. Another important issue is austerity measures that are strongly linked with debt, and they have a direct impact on women. And finally, to link debt with SDGs. And this is a call that has many years now that I hear it, and we call for it in several arenas. And usually the IFI say, but how? And it is possible to link SDGs with a debt sustainability analysis. It is possible. There is the information, there is the data, there are the ways, and what we actually really need is the political will to do it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. And I think if you have a look at the W7 communique, it is a long communique, partly because of the really strong desire to bring a feminist perspective to the whole range of issues. And at the very core is looking at economic issues, because we know it underpins so much of the other work and what makes it possible. So thank you for that overview, Patricia. I'd like to turn now to Debbie, and anyone who has been on Zoom calls or seen Debbie will know her interesting fact about her. Debbie owns more than 300 pairs of earrings. And they're often on display, much to the delight of everyone on the calls. Switching a bit to the W7, Debbie. Debbie is on the organizing committee of the W7, and we've chosen the phrase gender justice to frame our work. Can you elaborate a little bit on why this phrase and what it means in this moment?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Yes, the earrings are a superpower. They put a smile on people's face, and I just like that. With that said, I love this question, because if we want to create change or facilitate change in any way, you need to understand power and what gender justice gives us beyond just using, say, women's rights, especially for the W7, is to understand power in its core, how it works, how it changes depending on the situation, who has it and who doesn't have it, and most importantly, especially with the intersectional framework, how is it that we can work to dismantle oppressive power and move towards a collectivist power for the good of everyone? And a key piece of that in the work that we're doing is around the movement building piece. It's super important to have a gender justice framework because it's liberatory, but it also is constantly asking the question of, like, who needs to be here in order for us to develop key strategies on advocacy and solutions that are actually going to bring forth a change that benefits everyone. And I think a key piece of the work that we're doing with the W7 is that there are not only just representatives from the G7 countries, we've also actively ensured that there are folks from the Global South who are part of the organizing that we are looking to create. Is it perfect? No, but gender justice forces us to ask the question always, how can we do better? And at a time where we are facing a major backlash that Beth has articulated at the beginning, what gender justice affords us is the ability to understand how power has changed, the way it has changed, how in some cases also introspection, we've been caught off guard, but it forces us to think about those new strategies to confront it, especially when it says that things like human rights, LGBTQ rights, or reproductive rights, et cetera, that those are nice to haves. Gender justice allows us to be what we call at my organization, a squeaky wheel, to remind people that these are not just nice to haves, they're fundamental to our society's thriving. So that is why we use gender justice. It's important and it's key, and it's going to be super, super important to creating the world that we need to imagine now, since things have definitely changed.
Great, thanks, Debbie. That framing has been so important in the W7 and really given us a learning and a grounding perspective, and we thought it was really important to share with this community today. Over to Claire, and the interesting fact from Claire is that their family includes a hairless Sphinx cat named Finn. So
That is correct.
that is correct. Is it a big cat, a little cat?
He's a little cat, and he likes to bite. He's actually a little psychopath, and he does it randomly for no reason, but we love him.
I think there's a lesson in there somewhere.
Probably around boundaries. Is that fair?
So your question, Claire, as Debbie mentioned, a gender justice framing intentionally brings issues of inclusion, intersectionality, LGBTQ rights into the discussion. And Dignity Network is part of the Pride 7, one of the engagement groups this year for the G7. It's in the history of engagement groups, it's a relatively newer engagement group. Can you give us a little bit of an overview of the work of the P7, what you're hoping to accomplish, how you see the panorama in this year?
Thank you. So just, I guess, to introduce myself a little bit. So Dignity Network Canada is a network based in Canada that brings together over 60 organizations that work on LGBTIQ plus rights globally, and those might be LGBTIQ plus led organizations, or they might be more mainstream human rights, development, humanitarian organizations that are trying to get it right on diverse SOGIESC inclusion. I'm also speaking today with a little bit of a P7 hat on. So P7 is the Pride 7 group. So there's obviously C7, W7, L7, there's P7 too. We're the youngest of the sevens, and Dignity is working together with our partner EGAL that is leading on this effort. So you heard from Kim yesterday on the first panel of the day. So the P7 Summit is coming up on the 22nd and 23rd of May, where we're bringing together a really incredible and diverse range of folks to be considering the current landscape. I guess a little bit to frame my comments is that across both the work of the Pride 7, the communique that we're put together, the discussions we'll be having at the summit, the work of our members, we're about upholding global LGBTIQ plus rights, but we're also about upholding and fighting for the conditions that make LGBTIQ plus rights possible and make it possible for people to lead safe, dignified lives in which they can thrive. So that means changing laws that criminalize people for their very identity or their expression. It means challenging laws and policies to enable freedoms of expression, association, assembly. It means tackling violence in all of its forms, recognizing how GBV can be compounded for people experiencing multiple intersecting structural inequalities. It's about recognizing that poverty can be multidimensional. It's about inclusive healthcare, inclusive education for all. In terms of humanitarian response, we know that LGBTIQ plus communities, we know from growing evidence, are more vulnerable in terms of pre-emergency marginalization. And we also know that there's building evidence around challenges in humanitarian systems and financing where they don't serve our communities. It means that we have to redirect valued and diminishing funding from human rights work in order to support humanitarian response amongst our communities. So it's really important that we're considering queer, trans, diverse SOGIESC communities across all of our work. And I just want to frame that, you know, we've also been fighting for safer and more inclusive societies for a really long time as well. I'm going to end my remarks there, I think, because I've got more to come in the next bit. But I think that hopefully just frames some of the conversation. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you for that overview. I think that's really helpful. I want to go back to Patricia, and I'm hoping this isn't giving you whiplash, but we're trying to demonstrate the relevance of feminist approaches across this whole range of issues that's under discussion by the C7 and under discussion by the G7. And so going back to economics, Patricia, you gave us initially some of the areas where a feminist approach to fiscal policy is relevant and highlighted the importance of investing in care infrastructure, protection, social security, and some of the issues that are being raised by feminists in Latin America. We're seeing increasing debt levels throughout the region, as you mentioned earlier. And there are risks that these impose to women. And I'm wondering if you can outline what changes you would like to see take place in debt management and debt policies from a feminist perspective. So digging a little bit more into the specific issue of debt.
Thank you, Beth. And even this morning we were discussing about actionable policies or deliverable policies, that sometimes it's what governments, or in the case of C7 Canada, would really be keen to see. Of course, for us, it's really important to have a middle and long-term impact, but if I can speak about specific changes, where to start from, I would mention, for instance, women are the population that are more exposed to vulnerabilities in the world. Economic vulnerabilities, social, climate vulnerabilities, and this should be the type of criteria that needs to be used when global economic policies are taken. By that I mean policies around access to concessional financing, about how to redistribute special drawing rights, which countries should have fast access to debt restructuring or to immediate debt cancellation or debt relief. Those kind of policies are led by a criteria that is GDP per capita. And this criteria is so narrow, it hides all these vulnerabilities that, of course, all the population bears with, but women, as part of one of the vulnerable populations, are more exposed to, are overrepresented. So to have a change in this criteria and include vulnerabilities instead just a simple GDP per capita would be an important change. A second one, and this is more from Latin America, but I know that in other southern regions, some countries do have, is fiscal rules. Fiscal rules are guidelines or regulations from governments to set specific targets for itself. Usually are, in many cases, combined or discussed with the IMF, but in many other cases they're not. It's just the country that puts these kinds of fiscal rules. And for instance, these rules are a limit for current expenditure. So this year in the public budget, no more than, I don't know, X percentage will be aimed to social expenditure. And this is, of course, not fair. We are calling for fiscal rules that put limits to the debt service payment, for instance. Or if a debt service payment increases over a certain amount of a certain portion of the public budget, then wealth taxes needs to be increased. Or this kind of changes that are very concrete, very specific, and that are applied in several countries in the Global South can also be a change to prioritize expenditures that would benefit women. And lastly is the change of narratives. And this is something that feminist economists in Latin America have been working on, based on the role of women in the social reproduction. And I'm also talking about transgender women and the role that they have in social reproduction, that it includes the care work, but it's beyond. And so the call and the main demand is to prioritize sustainability of life based on the role of women in the social reproduction before or first than the sustainability of debt, which is mainly three main indicators about debt that lead the main decisions. But we should prioritize also these other criteria that it can be turned into ratios as well. As I said, there is the information. The problem is that no one is producing all that data because it can be elaborated, it can be produced. And this would be really important in the current context where women are excluded of main urgent global economic decisions that have been taken after the pandemic, and especially considering that global economic policies are not gender neutral. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. I think we're so indebted to the work of feminist economists that have worked now for quite a while to make these issues visible, to help us understand the areas of life, of economic life that traditional economics has ignored. So I think this is such an important piece to bring to the discussion. I'm going to go back to Debbie now. Debbie, for another question to you, we've talked a little bit about the increasing activity, the rise of anti-rights, anti-gender actors. You work with an organization that focuses on reproductive rights. And so I'm wondering if you can elaborate a little bit on the role this plays in the G7. Last year, if I don't know if people remember, there was one of the headlines in the Italy meeting was the word abortion was removed from the text of the leaders' communique. And there was a lot of criticism around that. How do you see this discussion unfolding this year? What are you looking for? What do you suggest we look for? What's going to be important to follow?
I'll start out bluntly by saying it is going to be probably chaotic, but let me frame it as to why. As mentioned, the organization I work for, Action Canada for Sexual Health and Rights, works on rights, and we do that here in Canada, but also globally. So we are in international spaces quite often, talking to civil society organizations around the world. We're also negotiating around certain treaties pertaining to reproductive rights and other human rights elements. And for a long time, by virtue of the privilege of being in those spaces, we were able to see some of the early signs that things were shifting globally. And interestingly enough, here in Canada, for those who live here, we've been seeing how those shifts have had ripple effects in this country provincially, specifically with anti-trans laws in particular provinces. And so for us as an organization, we often try to tell people that there are usually two clear signs that far-right regression is on the rise, and it's attack on reproductive rights. So we can talk about the reversal of Roe v. Wade a couple of years ago, but it's also attacks on LGBTQ rights, and these are both centered on reproductive autonomy. The issue is not necessarily just those two canary in the mine issues that usually always happen simultaneously. It is how are these an entry point for the other erosion of human rights? And so while these two things are happening at the same time, far-right actors are also pitting communities against each other, cisgender women primarily against LGBTQ people because somehow we're not queer, and I am. But then we're also seeing how this manifests in multilateral spaces like the G7. The removal of abortion is indicative of what I would call a chaotic conservatism that is being utilized by some of these countries. And over the last 2 years, we've seen a number of elections take place. And so some of the heads of state that are going to meet in June look a lot different than they did a year or two ago. Canada's currently going through an election. So we have to ask the question, even as people who are here in Canada, regardless of who gets elected, things are going to look different. And we have to ask the question, who's going to actually champion sexual and reproductive rights at that table? Trump is going to be there. And I think it's important for me to name that because it goes back to that chaotic conservatism. It isn't just ideological. It is about disruption. And when the G7 gets utilized to create disruption, what does that mean when communiques are then utilized as an exercise to signal to supporters or other people involved in this, this intersecting situation of anti-rights, and what does it mean for the most marginalized people in the world? And so for us, we're seeing, again, the reinstatement of the global gag rule in the United States. If you're really interested, my organization wrote a brief that we released a couple of weeks ago that talks about the global gag rule, but also the erosion of global health systems, because the two are connected. It's not just women's rights and reproductive rights. It's about eroding the entire health system. We're going to see disruption happen. What we need to do as civil society members is to use our influence, framed by gender justice, to ensure that the worst damage that we can expect doesn't cause the most harm. And so it's going to involve influencing, but it's also going to involve us having conversations like this amongst other civil society, but also transnationally, because what we are up against is also doing solidarity and collaboration transnationally. So we have to be best prepared to respond to it.
Super, thanks for that. And I think one of the themes across this discussion is this sense of interconnectedness of issues. And one of the issues that we know is on the G7 agenda this year is transnational repression. And I think what I also heard in what you're saying is the links of bringing this perspective to some of these other discussions. We know with transnational repression, which is one government trying to influence elections or attack activists that are living in Canada or elsewhere, we know that there is a gendered element to that women are targeted in different ways, that LGBTQ people are targeted in different ways. And that has to be part, it's not a separate issue, but it has to be part of the discussions of transnational repression, not just kept in a separate box. Claire, back to you. I want to stick with the leaders' communiques, with the G7 discussions. And it was in Germany a number of years ago that LGBTQ plus issues were first put on the official agenda of the G7 leaders. And since then, civil society advocates, like we do, have been working to build on that, to strengthen it, to make gains in both commitments and language. And given this, I'm wondering if you have reflections on the C7 communique that we've been discussing since yesterday.
I do, Beth. Thank you for the question. So, I mean, our position really as P7 is quite clear, which is that the G7 leader statement coming out of Italy was inclusive of LGBTIQ plus communities. This builds on many years of sustained advocacy to build on and strengthen that language. So it is shocking, a little shocking, to see a C7 communique that doesn't include LGBTIQ plus communities. Over the past 24 hours, we've been trying to kind of figure out how this happened, and so I don't have a full line of sight over all of the discussions that happened in the working groups, the process of editing. We do know that LGBTIQ plus was mentioned in the previous draft in March, and also that the W7 offered feedback recommending that the language be further strengthened to include a rights-based approach in general and strengthening language on reproductive rights and SRHR more generally as well. We have obviously, there's been a number of discussions around this, and Cooperation Canada, wonderfully, thank you, Kate, for your openness to have this conversation, have agreed to have a follow-up conversation around some of the gaps in the current communique, as well as a conversation around how we can synthesize some of the recommendations and advocacy strategies coming out of the various sevens as well at this moment, where that kind of cross-sectoral alliance building is more important than ever. So thank you very much for that, because it's really important, I think, that we're able to have these conversations openly as a group, right? If this communique does not represent the whole of civil society, let's create spaces where we can say that. I think that's really, really important. And I guess just to say, I guess in terms of expectations, I've done a lot of work on diverse, ODS, inclusive development, humanitarian response. I'm used to being in rooms where we argue very politely to please be taken out of the footnotes or the glossary or the lists of inequalities. We are used to hearing arguments about word counts and it's challenging in the editing process, but there's no neutral argument for why it's okay to leave some communities behind, right? And I think going back to, thank you. I think, why does this matter? So I've been thinking about this a little bit over the past 24 hours, and of course for most of my professional life over the past few years. Queer and trans communities have really been at the thin end of the wedge, right? We've really been those canaries in the coal mine, together with movements working on racial and indigenous justice, organizations working on refugees and migrants, organizations working particularly on abortion rights. The evidence on anti-gender and anti-democratic politics is now over a decade strong. And what we know is that this kind of politics is flexible and it's context specific. It shows up in different ways in different places. But it is, in some respects, I was talking to my colleague here at the front yesterday, we were talking about if this is showing up in this space, is this issue, it's trans here, it's abortion rights, you know, how do we dodge this, right? Because I'm sort of seeing two responses at times to the acceleration of this kind of politics that we're now seeing in state policy, in multilateral spaces. It's leading to the destruction of human rights norms. I mean, we know all of this, right? So how do we dodge this? This is a many-headed hydra that we cannot dodge, okay? We've been actually going through a difficult learning process, I would say, within LGBTIQ+ movements, SRHR movements, feminist movements. Sometimes we've gotten it wrong, right? I think there was a feeling 5 or 6 years ago that maybe we could just be a little bit quiet about trans rights, and maybe therefore we'd be okay if we had a version of gender equality that we could push through, right? What we've learned is that that kind of politics actually doesn't work, right? We have to be working much more intersectionally and much more in solidarity if we're to stand a chance, because this kind of politics feeds on fracture within our movements and the people who we've left behind, and the extractive kind of politics that we've normalized within our movements. Where do we go from here? Am I allowed to try and bring it somewhere slightly more positive? Intersectionality is the answer, we know that. Cross-movement building is the answer, we know that. I think the conversation, at least amongst those of us that have been really building strategies around how to contest this, is what does that mean in practice? So this means building spaces that can be both about the general and the specific. It means retaining language that we fought hard for. It also means moving beyond a politics of us versus them, including the ways that we can sometimes do that within progressive spaces as well. So, I mean, I want to pick up here on some different pieces that we've heard around meeting people where they're at, building a politics of empathy, and challenging the normalization of the lack of empathy that we're seeing in so many spaces, and that's actually, you know, driving lots of cyclones through the entire international aid system as we speak. And finally, it's really important, this kind of politics feeds on zero-sum conceptions of rights, right? It's about pitching certain rights holders against others. And so we know this doesn't work. So the answer has to be in building a greater politics of abundance, of reciprocity, and also of hope, right? We have to know that we can win this. I'm seeing one of the beauties of being the canary in the coal mine is that we're still here, okay? We've watched this happen to queer and trans movements globally, okay? Like, I'm not going to romanticize the grief and trauma and destruction that has accompanied so much of this regressive politics, particularly when it is incubated in the global north and exported into the global south, where the effects have been absolutely devastating, okay? But we are still here. We're not going anywhere. And we have to find ways of winning. We have to find ways of coming together. And I'm going to end there, I think, just for now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think that we're very quick to talk about intersectional feminism. We're very quick to use that word. And yet there are lots of lessons of what it means in practice and how we can actually live into that in the work that we do on a daily basis. So thanks for that. I'd like to now I know there's lots of people in the audience that work in this area, that have questions, that have comments. Let's take questions, comments from the floor, and then I'll come back at the very end to the panel to give them a few minutes to wrap up each. But we'd really like to hear from you now. Oh, good. I see there, and then over there. At the back.
Hi, everyone. My name's Jocelyn Dubois. I'm the representative for the Labour 7 group, the CLC, the Canadian Labour Congress, for hosting the Labour 7 events this year, none of which are planned yet. But I just wanted to share that we echo many of the points that you brought up today. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend yesterday, but just the short exposure to the conversation this morning, I just wanted to share that the Labour 7 is very much focused on many of the human rights issues that are being brought forward, the LGBTQ protections, the social protections in terms of job protections for women globally, that we're calling for very sort of standard labor asks in terms of supporting a call for social protections and a new social contract globally, essentially, is one of the campaigns of the labor movement globally, calling on decent work, calling for fair wages, calling for freedom of association and collective bargaining rights to ensure that we can build this kind of stability and protection moving forward for all members of the global workforce and all communities. And I just wanted to share as well that we are part of the climate and you know, the mega trends movement that we're trying to push for social justice around those issues as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much. It's great to hear from another engagement group. I saw one, Kate, is that who I'm seeing there? Need my glasses on. Yeah.
Thanks, Beth. Hi, everyone. My name's Kate. I work at Cooperation Canada, and I think I've met nearly everyone here. But thank you so much. This is kind of our last session before we invite kind of beyond civil society guests into this space. And I did really want to take a moment to just thank you all so much for being here. It's been a really great day and a half, and I know so many of you have worked so hard, have traveled so far, have contributed to this process through different steering committees and drafting processes in different ways. The Cooperation Canada team on the kind of substance and logistics have really been thoughtful about the way that we've been able to share this space for the last day and a half. So thank you, everyone, for being here. I'd also really like to thank this panel, and it's been really excellent for us to kind of end, I think, on a way of lifting us up and thinking as C7, how can we really ensure that we're making those connections between other really important movements and engagement groups, whether it's the W7, the Pride 7, great to have you here, Jocelyn, and the Labour 7. We have people from the climate movement. We were speaking yesterday around kind of transnational repression around the context of civic space. So, you know, it's been a really nice way for, I think, us to finish this civil society segment in terms of kind of making those connections. And I just really want to echo a couple of things. One is, I think it's super important in this moment of deep polarization in the world, that when we are in these spaces, these can be spaces where we can acknowledge the good work we've done, but also call each other out and make points where we think we need to do more and better. And so I really appreciate the way that today the panel has kind of pushed us to think about things that we could do differently and better, and the very gracious but clear way that you've communicated that to us. So maybe a round of applause for this really useful way. It's important that we have these spaces and that we can raise these issues in these spaces in a way that feels constructive and good and makes this work and makes our movement stronger and better. And that's really, really important, and something that us at Cooperation Canada are really deeply committed to. So I really look forward to kind of continuing those conversations with the W7, the P7, the C7, the Labour 7, the Youth 7, and really making those connections. And then I think my final point is kind of as we lift ourselves up and think about what is ahead, you know, I'm actually looking at these two signs. Nous sommes plus forts qu'ensemble. We are stronger together. And I do think the more we can be amplifying, connecting each other's messages, strategizing on the different tactics that we can use and deploy to influence, the better. So big thanks to the Cooperation Canada team for kind of thinking strategically about ending this day and a half as civil society with this kind of moment of connection across movements and engagement groups and issues. A big thanks to all of you for being here. And a huge thanks to this panel. I think it's really kind of ended us on a really strong note and can make us go into these next sessions this afternoon kind of feeling clear and good and constructive about how we can be stronger together. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you so much to the Cooperation Canada and very much to the whole team. The invitation, actually, in full disclosure, was W7, would you like to have a panel? And so we were very grateful that the invitation was issued, and we named the speakers, we discussed, and we coordinated. And I think that openness is also very indicative of a strong foundation to move forward. And just one thing, Kate, hopefully we're calling people in rather than calling people out, but really appreciated your comments. Let's take a couple more at this table here, and then there. And then I'd like to go back to maybe we'll see how many we can do.
Thank you guys so much. My first point, on the G7 website, there's 7 engagement groups, so I propose calling them the 7-7. So second, my question, I constantly hear that GAC is gender, Canada's doing such a great job at gender. So my question is, gender in 2025, is it going to stick around after the changing government? Will somebody new, a new country maybe step up? Or will gender have to be fighting against all these other cross-cutting issues?
Thank you. Over here, sorry, there. Yeah, we'll do there and there. 2 more. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Zia from Pakistan Development Alliance in Asia. I just wanted to bring the attention of this gender justice group towards the education and debt relationship. Almost 251 million children are out of school in the world. Out of them, 130 million are girls. So it's almost the population of Pakistan. Like the population of Pakistan is 225 million. So it's more than the population of a country is out of school. So can we ask the G7s to cancel the debt and support the education, particularly the girls' education, because that also contributes to strengthen democracy, strengthen fundamental freedoms, human rights, and it also brings gender justice, equity to our countries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks so much. Robin Montgomery, the HIV Legal Network, based in Toronto. So thank you, Kate. Thank you to this amazing panel. Thank you to Cooperation Canada for hosting us this week. I guess my question is, so I'm revving to go. So what's the next step, right? I totally agree around the connections. We're only stronger together, and we have a real opportunity to really lift that up. We also have an opportunity this afternoon. So I would love to hear perhaps from Cooperation Canada a little bit more about what that session is going to look like. And from all of the nodding heads around the room, I think the messages that this panel has brought forward are core to our work. And I would really personally like to see that come out front and center in our discussions with the diplomatic community and with global affairs this afternoon, because Canada has been a leader in this area, and we need to challenge them to continue to be that leader in the vacuum that we are seeing, and the cyclones, as Claire put it, that are ravishing our world around us. So that's my call to action, and thank you.
Thank you so much. How about if I turn the mic back to the panel for final responses to the comments from the audience, closing remarks. Also this question of it's not just the G7, but where else are we going? And then can I turn the mic over to someone from Cooperation Canada to give us a preview of the afternoon before we break for lunch, abusing my moderator privileges a little bit. Patricia, would you like to go first? You have 2-3 minutes to wrap us up.
Thank you so much, and thanks to all the participants for your great comments. I think it's important to keep closing the gaps, closing the breach between all our calls and demands on policies for women's rights with the financing for these rights. And what do I mean with this? In our countries, but I assume in most of them, and you will tell me how is it like in Canada and how the G7 is addressing this in Canada. But in our countries, usually if you want to discuss about these topics is with the ministries of development. In some cases, there are ministries of women, as we have in Argentina a long time ago, now they closed it. But you never speak with the Ministry of Finance. So you talk about policies, you talk about our social and reproductive rights, but then who will finance that? They don't talk among them, between these different ministries. And even when a country is going to restructure its debt, the IMF will never talk with the finance minister about gender or women's rights. So we need to keep closing these gaps, this bridge in different levels among us, civil society organizations, but also in our governments, because they are finally who are making the decisions towards these changes that we want to achieve. So this is also a challenge for us in Latin America, and I'm sure it's also at a global scale. Then I like what it was you mentioned there in the back from L7 about social contract, and I think this is a very interesting approach, because yes, we need a new social contract and at national levels, but that it can be reflected also at global levels when global fiscal policies are taken. And lastly, about debt and education, Zia, I think it would be a wonderful call to close from the C7 that we want debt cancellation for girls' education. I think that would be one of the greatest conclusions that we can have from this summit. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Debbie, final remarks.
I'll be real quick. So thank you for the questions and comments that have come up. I just want to say that as we have seen shifts come from the United States, specifically again on the global gag rule and the dismantling of USAID, that a lot of people are looking for who's going to take that leadership role. And in the international spaces that, again, my colleagues have been fortunate enough to be in, people name Canada's leadership. I'm like, whoa, we're really good at the PR thing. Because they really, whatever messages are being sent abroad, people are hearing it and they're feeling it because they've benefited from it, right? And I think, especially in the context of us being in an election where Canada's leadership in the world is being discussed, this is an opportunity for us as advocates and people who can influence to really focus on what that leadership looks like. And so the second half of today, I think from what I've heard, presents a really interesting opportunity. And that opportunity could be, where can Canada lead from a gender justice perspective when people around the world really want to see it because they have seen it before. So I would just say that there's an opportunity for us to continue to do that influencing and work on that together.
Great, thank you so much. Claire.
Yeah, I'm going to build on that a little bit, I think. Going back to, I guess, what can we be hopeful or optimistic about? I think 5 years when we were starting to track anti-gender politics and what this would mean, it felt frightening, but also really lonely, because I think as trans and queer movements, we weren't really sure who would show up in solidarity. 5 years later, the list of people that are showing up in solidarity is actually really good. I mean, it needs to be better, but it's great. It was lovely to sit in the working group in sustainable development yesterday. And actually, I didn't have to lead the conversation about LGBTIQ plus inclusion, because my colleagues in health, SRHR, and working on feminist and gender equality were leading that discussion for us. So I want to give a shout out for that. And it's reflected at various scales globally and in different national contexts that people are figuring out that we've got to work together. When the Trump cuts came in, there was a wonderful statement that went out from IPPF Global, Amnesty, ILGA World, and maybe AWID. And it was just, I mean, go look at the statement, it was just perfect. It was just lovely. And that infrastructure did not exist 5 years ago. Like, it really didn't. We were like, okay, well, we need to talk to AWID, right? Like, we need to build that infrastructure. That exists now in a way that it didn't. So I think that's wonderful. And I guess looking at the C7 communique and wondering were there kind of elements of self-censorship on civil society side, like all of these questions. Okay, let's not self-censor, but also there's an opportunity not only in not self-censoring, but in pushing out much more broadly. And again, that goes to the question of Canadian leadership, where so many people are looking to, potentially a Canadian government that can show more strong and principled leadership on the interconnection of our issues going forward. So thank you. I think I'll end there.
Great. What a marvelous panel. I'm just reminded of two things spark in my mind. One is an article that was published several years ago. It was on why autocrats fear feminists. And it was talking about how feminists, LGBTQ activists are defending democracy. And that's one of the reasons that they are targeted by autocrats, because they demonstrate the weakness in those systems. And the second one is there is a feminist from Mexico who I admire greatly, Lydia Alpizar, who used to head AWID, actually. And she works now with women human rights defenders in Central America. And they are always saying, movements save lives. And I think that is very, very true. And movements need intersectionality, movements need solidarity, movements need openness to learn and to build and to grow together. And so I think this panel is a really good example of how we come together, how we build movements, how we think about different issues, and how we make those connections. So please join me in thanking our fantastic panelists. Thank you. Is someone going to come up and tell us a little bit of where we go this afternoon? Thanks.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks to all the panelists. Maybe we can take a family photo if that's okay. If you like, yeah, great. So as we come to close of the civil society portion of the C7 Summit, I'd like to take a moment to thank our panelists and our panelists throughout the day and a half, but also to thank all of you for your insights, commitments, and lots of energy and lots of great, constructive, important feedback as well that you have provided and brought to this space. So we've shared some challenges, shared some strategies and some hopes, and hopefully we've strengthened a collective voice that demands change and rebuilding. But of course, this is just one chapter, and the work continues, right? So in the months ahead, I'll talk about this afternoon in a sec, but in the months ahead, we have some real opportunities to drive these recommendations forward. What we know so far, we have the G7 finance ministers meeting in mid-May, as well as the Leaders Summit from June 15th to 17th in Kananaskis. And that meeting will bring the heads of state together. So we'll be working hard to try and make sure that civil society's priorities are not just heard, but also, very importantly, acted on. So as we have a long runway for this year's G7, there's going to be lots of ministerials afterward, after the summit, hopefully, and we'll get a better idea of what that's going to look like in the weeks to come. But to carry this forward, we'll follow this whole kind of sum it up with an action document, so please expect that in a few weeks to come. What have we learned? What is next? And how can we improve, and how can we take the recommendations forward to this and create real sustained pressure for change, and not just at the G7, but kind of throughout. So this afternoon's dialogue, first we have obviously lunch that I'm holding everybody up for, but also we will have a high-level panel moderated by our very own Kate, which will feature some high commissioners, ambassadors, as well as Kate Gillis, who was a panelist yesterday as well, and a representative of the Government of Canada. The Sherpa will be joining, the G7 Sherpa will be joining us for the latter part, so that's from 4 o'clock. She will be joining us, at which time we will be presenting the communiqué officially to her, as well as the recommendations therein. And then we will have a reception afterward, starting around 5 o'clock. So that's the plan for this afternoon. So just a few reminders. So like I said, lunch is coming up. Then we'll welcome the attendees from the Government of Canada and the diplomatic representatives. And we kindly ask that we free up maybe these 3 tables in the front so that the speakers have quick access. So maybe after lunch we can keep those free if possible. And then we'll see you all back here for 2 o'clock for the high-level panel discussion, which is themed International Cooperation in a Changing World Order. So one more time, thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you to all of you.